Welcome, and thank you very much for joining this session, which is going to really focus on the non-carbon elements of carbon offsetting.
I'm the Director of Climate and Forest for World Wildlife Fund, and I've been asked to make sure that the spotlight is really shed on our panelists on the left, the people that actually help projects and activities happen that mitigate climate change and also, of course, help realize very important ecological and social co-benefits. So David and I are going to just provide a little bit of we're going to move from sort of a high altitude down. And my job is to sort of, in the beginning of 2014, explain where I see the carbon offset market and environment. And we were joking, getting ready, coming here today. As Jonathan said, I started this thing called the Climate, Community, and Biodiversity Alliance. That, coupled with the VCS, which back then was a different name, are probably the two primary tools that offset developers will use, both to have very credible carbon, but also to sort of promote good governance and social practices and ecological outcomes. And when I was asked to run this Climate and Biodiversity Alliance, it was some wonderful corporate and NGO partners coming together. It was BP and Intel, SC Johnson at the time, very forward-looking groups that said we can find good offset projects that are both good for climate but also have very significant wins in other areas. And at the time I was doing my PhD in Berkeley, and they said, well, why don't you come to Washington and run the Climate and Biodiversity Alliance? And I said, that sounds like such a great opportunity, but we will need to change the name from the Climate and Biodiversity Alliance to the Climate, Community, and Biodiversity Alliance. And they weren't that excited because they had already completed the logos and the letterhead, right? And so they assured me that communities were very important at the time. And they said, no, we absolutely want a standard that embraces them, but also four words, the Climate, Community, Biodiversity Alliance, this is just, it's too much. But we were able to prevail. And back then, this is 2003, there was a real sense that from some of the difficulties in the UN negotiations that the forestry component of climate mitigation was really looked at very poorly. It was seen as sort of a carbon colonialism type of situation. So now we fast forward to 2014, and I think what we've found is that really the co-benefits are absolutely critical, both for engaging corporates, but for all of us to do our work. I don't think many of us got involved or maybe are here in this room because we want to hug an invisible avoided CO2 molecule. It's very difficult to put your arms around an avoided invisible gas that's been so often the stories that come out from Tanzania or Nepal with cook stoves or with forestry projects, that's how people can actually understand what's happening. So I think at this point now, I see sort of three projects having to have three things. The first thing we know, they need to have credible carbon components so that there's a central currency that can be used. And that's the grease that allows this ecosystem, maybe not the grease, that's the food of the ecosystem. We sort of have to have a common currency. And I don't think any projects are going to make it out there unless they can talk about strong co-benefits. And we've seen that in the voluntary market, as well as some of the compliance market where the dirty offsets or the brown offsets that have very little social or environmental components have really gotten booted out first. And the ones that are surviving are projects that do good in numerous arenas. And then I think what we're also seeing now is, and I'd love to hear what the others think about this, projects also have to have a much more mature conversation with governments. Early on, you could almost do a project and just put your blinders on and move forward and try and do good co-benefits. But now with the emergence of a California compliance market, with the jurisdictional red stuff that's going on with the VCS, I think offset investors are starting to look for projects that can scale up and have intelligent conversations with government about the role of good projects in state and regional and national development plans. So So I'm really happy to be here. Like I said, I really want to hear more about the projects themselves and from you all. So I'll stop there, Jonathan, if that's okay.
Thank you, John. David.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thanks, Jonna, for those good comments. I think that, and I like the way you structured it in being that projects need to have three different things to be able to succeed in the marketplace. The way we think about it is, you all surely have a cell phone in your pocket. And if you think back to the very first version of cell phones that we had, the first version were fairly clunky pieces of machinery that at some point back in the 80s were used, but not very broadly. And then after that came version 2, which gave us texting capacities. Then 3G and probably 4G, which is what we probably most have in our pockets now, give us all the bells and whistles that we have. And just like the cell phones, I think carbon offsetting is moving fairly quickly. And we're seeing some really interesting evolutions. And I think the first main evolution is what you described earlier, Jonathan, and you, Jonna, described to a greater extent, was this idea that projects that bring with them benefits beyond the carbon are really powerful and can help drive, obviously, investment in the project, but give the buyers and the folks who end up buying and retiring these credits a real confidence that these projects are fitting within a broader social contract, if you will, that's really helping to drive not only emission reductions, but benefits to communities, benefits to certain groups of people, benefits to communities, and benefits to biodiversity. And so you've seen the evolution of CCBA, which is now a standard in its own right and has a very robust set of rules and procedures for how you demonstrate those benefits to climate, community, and biodiversity. You see other standards as well. I mean, I see Stefano Merlin in the audience was here a while ago, but he helped set up social carbon, which is a very similar type of standard operating in Brazil, but throughout the world as well. And they provide a framework that's the same. And I see Margaret Bruce also from the Women's Standard. So you're starting to see the fact that these standards are starting to evolve, and you're starting to see new flavors come out and develop these frameworks that allow you to demonstrate, to add on to carbon, if you will. So in many ways, carbon, because it's tangible in the sense that we can actually quantify it and have rigor around it, and we've demonstrated that over time, we can now use that as a vehicle to add on these other benefits that help to carry the message through and help to identify other benefits that these projects are doing, which are really powerful. And I'd like to just put out here, just for the future of the discussion here, this other idea, which I think is very valuable, which we're starting to see, and we saw last week with the announcement by Chevy, who's invested in developing a methodology to promote energy efficiency on college campuses. And the reason this is interesting is that I think in many ways Chevy is extracting value from their engagement in the sector and by purchasing and retiring offsets in a way that, in addition to bringing these additional benefits, which means clean energy to Ball State University and other universities, to them it's all about embedding offsetting into the brand. And to Chevy, I think in many ways what they saw was that if they wanted to recruit the engineers of the future who were going to help them build the cars of the future, they need to have that embedded in their corporate strategy. So in many ways, those benefits that those projects bring have been internalized by Chevy in a way that they're now able to tell their HR department, you go out and tell those engineers the cool stuff we're doing, because that's going to help us recruit the engineers of the future. They're going to help us build the clean cars of the future. So carbon offsetting, I think, is really evolving into a very rich and diverse space that has a number of different elements, whether it's all the way from being able to demonstrate projects that speak to corporates' commitment and engagement with particular sectors, such as might be community, biodiversity, et cetera, or whether it's a corporate who's able to really embed and extract the value from that activity into a way that helps build its brand. So it's interesting. We'll see. You're going to see where this goes, but I think it's exciting to see this evolution, to see that the market is really starting to engage and develop these new mechanisms for going forward. I'm certainly looking forward to hearing from Jennifer and Ben some of the detailed work that they've done, going down further into down away from, say, the high-level discussions that John and I have introduced.
As Jonathan said, I'm with the Global Alliance for Clean Cook Stoves. We're a public-private partnership. Last year, in 2012, our partners disseminated 8 million cook stoves globally. So that's a good achievement, but it's a small step towards the goal of 100 million. And half of those cook stoves were supported in some part by carbon finance. So carbon finance actually plays a really important role in helping to fund projects, businesses, programs that are linked to the clean cooking sector. It attracted 167 million roughly in finance for purchasing those offsets, and it was about 17 million offsets that were sold. So that's the equivalent of taking 4 or 5 coal-fired power plants offline for a year. So this is still, as I said, a small step towards our goal. So there's a huge potential for mitigating CO2 emissions, as well as having all these health, livelihood, and environmental impacts. We are mobilizing resources and convening the sector to try and have a common strategy, a common way forward, and catalyze this market. As it scales, there's going to be a need for commercial investment and a continued need for the purchase of offsets to bring financial flows into the sector. The benefits will be many. I've talked about them, and they'll be realized through the carbon offsets being able to support these projects. The carbon revenues can be used in a variety of different ways to help ensure the financial sustainability long-term of the clean cooking sector. So we don't see this as something where you come in, do a project, and leave. It needs to be a sustaining industry so that people can go out and purchase their next stove and replace their old one, and also move up the energy ladder to get cleaner fuels as well. So these revenues can be used in a variety of different ways. One, of course, is to reduce the cost, to make products more affordable for people at the base of the pyramid who have limited income to purchase cleaner stoves or fuels. But they can be used in other ways as well, as I said, to be more sustainable. So R&D to reduce the cost of technologies or improve the performance of technologies. They can be used on awareness raising and demand creation. So marketing campaigns to help increase the demand for these products and the awareness out there in the marketplace. They can also be used for maintenance programs and after-sales service, which is a really important element of having people continue to use their stoves. So carbon revenues play an important role, not only in making cook stoves more affordable, but also more accessible.
The TIST program, TIST, which is the International Small Group and Tree Planting Program, which is obviously not a Madison Avenue naming device, but was a seminar of 78 Tanzanian farmers, very, very poor subsistence farmers, who had been brought together in 1999 that came out of work where my wife had dragged me to central Tanzania on a church mission a year and a half before, and then back again 6 months before. And out of that, from discussions with the women and men in those small groups, was that the women were really disadvantaged by what had happened with deforestation. This area had once been dense forest with year-round rivers. It was now a desert. And we knew nothing about things like Rio in 1992, where they identified desertification, biodiversity loss, and climate change as the 3 global challenges that we had to meet as a species. We didn't know anything about that, but we arrived and suddenly you're face to face with these very hardworking, intelligent people who've had famine 3 years out of the past 5, who the women were walking for water sometimes 8 to 10 kilometers a day to take a 5-gallon plastic bucket and put it on their head and walk back 40 pounds on your neck. Isn't good for you. And girls as young as 8 would be starting to be doing that and not being taken out of school because there wasn't time for them to be able to haul water, get wood, and get back. And this was what had happened by bad agricultural practices, bad land use, and not paying much attention to what was happening. Now, having said that, before we all get kind of, oh, how could those people have done that to their environment? You might want to remember that the United States was once almost completely forested and then became almost completely denuded, and we had a thing called the Dust Bowl, where I grew up, and then it's now getting reforested. So there's hope in the United States too, but they didn't do anything that we haven't done It's just that they were way worse off when they started, and they're really way worse off today. So with that basis, we were trying to figure out how to encourage them to go ahead and start doing things, take action, to organize themselves to do things about their local environment. And the things they wanted to do is they wanted to improve the water. They wanted to have places they could get wood close by, woodlots. They wanted to have the ability to cook more efficiently. They wanted to have the ability to have fruit and nuts and things like that again. They wanted fodder for their cattle. They wanted the grass to grow again. All these perfectly reasonable things. And since this was largely church groups, of course, they wanted everyone to tithe, and they wanted to make sure that there was an increase in the number of people going to church. But you understand that's the context of what these 78 people in that room. And the TIST program ended up getting started because the only idea we could come up with was carbon as a way to get money to these folks. They were very isolated, but if they took the right local environmental actions, it was measurable what they were doing. And if you measured it accurately, you could transfer not the trees, you could never get them out of these places with no roads, not the fodder, but you could transport the information back to people who would, if it was credible, if it was transparent, if it had the proper kind of verifications, the proper kind of CCBA, et cetera, would pay money, which then allowed you to send that to the farmers as a thank you note from the Western world. It's not a lot of money, but you'd be amazed at how what's happened over these years is the power that the people feel that they are helping us in our world, because they have mostly felt like they were powerless, unimportant, impoverished, needing a handout, and suddenly by taking the right actions on their own land, by doing smarter agriculture, planting trees, that they were actually helping us solve the problems that we had. Now since then, again in the 14 years things have changed dramatically. There are more microbuses. We are no longer just in Tanzania. It spread first to India, southern India, and then to Uganda, southwestern Uganda, and then to Kenya, around Mount Kenya, and now in numerous places in Kenya. And in every case, what's been critical has been this sense of we're going to do things to solve our own local problems. We're going to make a difference, and oh, by the way, we're making a difference for the whole world. Really critical to what gets them going. So all I'm going to say is that TIST now has 43,000 individual program areas. What your accepted methodologies require us to treat as if it was a $10 million project, this quarter of an acre of trees around someone's house has to be measured. All the questions have to be answered for the methodology. All the information has to be submitted to VCS. We get verified, validated, and then verified by third-party auditors. It's submitted to CCBA. We're validated and verified by the auditors. It's an amazing process, but the net effect is we are getting money back to those farmers. They are getting immediate results. Within 3 to 4 years, they have twice as much benefit as the money that people have spent on doing the project. So it's actually happening. It's a 14-year overnight success. It is now cash flow positive. The program is being run on the income from the carbon. Will the investors who worked hard to do these pilot projects and develop these standards and all that kind of stuff get their money back? Probably not. I got asked by a very bright PhD candidate in the UK the different stakeholders and how they were doing, and we identified that the farmers were doing the best from the program and the investors were doing the worst. There's not much sympathy about that split, but that's actually the fact. So I think we're kind of at the grass, some people would say below the grassroots as far as this particular program, but it could not have happened if these other pieces were not being put in place simultaneously. the job we had was so focused and so difficult that there was no way we could have done the job that Jonathan and Carbon Neutral were doing about creating markets, that Jono was doing about CCBA, that they were doing on VCS, Jennifer on the cook stoves, making it more organized, because the cook stoves are a very complex thing to implement out in the boonies. And so we're just the beneficiaries of all their work.
I think you, in your opening remarks, and I know how much time and effort you've put into looking to scale up carbon finance through the compliance markets, that you have a special interest in RED projects, and you've done phenomenal work there. Ben, I know too that your project going from 0 to, what was the figure of the number of people, projects involved?
We're about 70,000 farmers who are active, and then the families that are related.
And I've seen that on your website, and it looks like it's going viral. But there is this scaling issue. And of course, the prize is compliance markets that take this on. But along the way, and particularly for this particular session, we're encouraging people to be impressed by progress, to, David, as you described it, to sort of a G4 level. What do you see, Jono, particularly the role of voluntary action in this space, and so the ecosystem of people you've got around here? How we are a very small, percentage of projects, and in terms of our efforts to offset or ameliorate global emissions. So what's the trajectory, and what do you think might be missing from what you've heard here today?
I mean, I think what we've seen, and I'll be interested in everyone's thoughts about this, but the voluntary market has allowed, it's allowed a solution to come if it decides to come, right? There's things that we can do in this room as organizations, whether it's a company that buys offsets or a project developer, but this has really allowed us to deal with the problem at a scale that is commensurate with what we know we need to do. I also think that the voluntary market and the examples provide, whether it's California regulators or companies that are willing, like Microsoft, to take on an internal target as well, to sort of say, we can do this. So I think we all wish the momentum was faster and bigger, and prices were higher, and there was a real demand. But that's above our pay grade, right? That's people who don't come to conferences. We wish they would, but the future is going to be decided by whether or not we can really take some of the models that are here and go to a much bigger level. And I think that we have had 10 or 15 years of this evolution, and now the stories and the validity and the ability to look up real carbon with real benefits, that's what's going to allow a regulatory market to come forward if the politics around that are even possible.
David, what do you think? How your views on the same kind of questions, and one that that Jono sort of touched on. That is there anything missing from this ecosystem from your perspective that would accelerate our efforts, Ben's efforts, and Jennifer's?
Well, of course, clearly the answer is, commitment from a huge number of corporates that would help drive a proper compliance market. But in the run-up to that, I think it's important to recognize that we've also seen an evolution of just, beyond what the supply side of the market is doing, which is what I described, and I think largely what we've been describing. In the demand side of the market, you started to see an evolution as well, whereas it used to be that you used to just report your greenhouse gas emissions, and that's what you had to do because that's what CDP said you had to do, that's even what the climate registry said you had to do, you had to report your emissions. But now, in 2014, reporting your emissions is not enough, actually. You actually need to take action. So in many cases, that's actually, you need to change the light bulbs. I need to maybe change your chiller. And you need to maybe even take some commitments on reducing your corporate footprint that might involve some offsetting. And I think that's a huge change. And I don't see any backtracking on that. And I think over the years, we've seen an ongoing commitment of the corporates who've taken on that commitment. They're not backsliding. And you start to see more and more. Microsoft last year was a great story. Chevy is a great story. And you're starting to see more and more of that. I think over time you'll start to see that people will recognize this. And if we're talking about a compliance market, I think going back to a Republican member of Congress of the Senate, Lindsey Graham, if you all recall, back when we were having a discussion in this country about having proper carbon legislation, he's the one who said, we got to get this done because it's the young people who care about this. And he said that. I don't know what exact words, but I think there's a growing recognition that the young people in this country and the world know that this is a problem. There's no debate on whether this is happening or not. And I think over time we'll start to recognize and come around to the idea that we need to do something about it. So I think, back to the point about kind of our discussion here, what I find so compelling about the offsetting is that it formally structures a pay-for-performance system in a way that delivers tangible benefits on the ground. And for a long, long time, we've all been worried about, all these development efforts that don't go for naught, and there's money down rat hole, et cetera, et cetera. Well, actually, with carbon, you actually get the results. And it's farmers and community members, like Ben was describing, in the field, receiving that money, going to planting that other tree, that are making a huge difference in people's lives. And I think, there's a number of different elements to the story. And although we don't have it now, I think we are building that case and that story to make a significant impact in the future.
Jennifer, would you agree with that? And do you think that our methods and approaches to measuring that impact beyond carbon are where we need them to be to engage and encourage more corporates to take on this approach?
Yeah, at the Alliance, we're definitely looking at more and more quantification of benefits. So really taking the impact and having common metrics, common methodologies to be able to report on that. And I think that's important for a variety of reasons. It's certainly important for corporate buyers who are looking at carbon credits and seeing those, those benefits. It's important for us as an association that's raising money to fund our activities to show that we're actually having tangible benefits from performing those activities. So it's important for impact investors. That's the other part of my title. So, people who are wanting to put money in and get financial returns, but also social returns. So I think we're seeing more and more this quantification of impacts is a very important area. And associations like ourselves, that we can play that role of trying to work across the sector and understanding what are the common metrics we can use, but also trying to finance research. Because that step between what's the output of a project and then what's the impact on the ground is often going to require research behind it to be able to show that link. And so being able to fund those research projects and deliver the results and have lots of different projects benefit from them, because it's expensive to do for an individual project or business, but the whole industry can benefit. So I think those are areas that we feel is where we can add some value, and certainly is going to only grow over time.
And do you want to add anything to that?
TIST is amazingly successful so far, but our 70,000 farmers, which is, I think the biggest of anybody who's gone out crazy enough to do the kind of things we're doing, there are probably 700 million farmers just like our 70,000 in the world. And they, as a group, create a larger amount of carbon emissions and black carbon emissions than all of transportation, than all of electric generation. They're a humongous slice of the pie by what they do in agriculture and what they do with deforestation. We're losing the size of Great Britain, each year in tropical forests. And we can't keep doing that. And so we've got to find, there is some issue about how do you scale. Clearly, the international process is not moving at the rapidity of taking care of Great Britain once a year on deforestation. And we've got to figure out how to scale without the politics being the leaders.
On the qualitative aspects, the story, are corporates, purchasers of credits, able to distinguish and to value those, I think was the question.
On the question of the benefits being important, the answer, as far as we're concerned, is absolutely yes. I'm not sure that that's true for everyone, but ours does have such a special focus on all the other benefits, and the way it's all been structured and the way it's been organized by the farmers for themselves, and they determined what they were doing, and they determined where they're planting and what they're planting and all that kind of stuff. If we don't get paid for the story, then we wouldn't be able to do all the things that we're doing. The health training, all the other pieces of the puzzle that has allowed it to go viral, all the stuff about making sure that women had a chance to be quantifiers, to be leaders, to get started, new clusters started. All that was necessary, and it costs money. So yes, you need to have all those extra benefits to pay for doing all those extra benefits.
You mentioned that when you were doing the CCBA, and there was a call of corporates and NGOs, John Brown, who was then head of BP, came on and said, hey, this is really interesting. He got it. Do we really need a pitch, or do you think we're kind of there? Those who get it, get it.
I love your question, because it goes to the question of scaling, right? If we really take ourselves as a community seriously, whether you're in a corporate or a nonprofit or a project developer or a broker who puts buyers and sellers together, we need that. And we have to be very honest that the nonprofit world is not great at elevator speeches with corporates, right? I mean, I wish I were. But I think...
The problem is you're still taking the stairs.
Yeah. I mean, there's two things, right? One is, as Jonathan said, we need a hook to give that speech. We need to get those meetings. And this was, for me, it was a remarkable opportunity with John Brown, the head of BP globally. And we're on a phone call, and I said, I can't believe you're involved with this on a personal level. And his point, and we've heard it elsewhere with Chevy and some of the others, is this makes us attract the best talent. And we believe that our company is only as good as the people that we bring into our fold. And I think that it also goes a little bit to what David was saying, that the social contract, that corporations are no longer isolated, that their brands can either be attacked by the Greenpeaces or cuddled by the Nature Conservancies. But we need to turn that game up very significantly. And I think what we'd like to offer is to second you for a year to one of our groups here and help us with that.
But I think ultimately what will drive the success of these additional frameworks for other benefits will be effective stakeholder and expert-led processes. Because I could sit here today and say, yeah, I'm going to determine how we're going to quantify this, and it's the best thing ever. But the reality is that you have to have a broad buy-in to that effort. So it's really a matter of having the processes in place that give confidence to the end result. And I think that's really where you're going to go. And I think in this case, process may be even more important than the actual result, because process that generates trust will be able to help you move along. And I think that'll be really important. But I think I'm excited to be in this conversation and to see where we might be in a couple of years, because I would imagine that these frameworks will continue to evolve to the point where some of them will be actually quantifiable in a rigorous fashion.
I do think that, if I were to conclude on the basis of the questions and the answers, that this ecosystem of remarkable people that we've heard from on the panel are building confidence in carbon finance and offset as being a mechanism that can address a range of issues that is now commonly being called natural capital, and is also providing a carrier gene, if I could use that word, a transactable element onto which these additional benefits can be added, measured, and then potentially in future be appropriately valued.